68-year-old Jeremiah Banks sits bruised in a grimy Flint Rock jail cell, wrists cuffed, blood dripping from a busted lip after a savage arrest. A sneering white guard mocks him, "No one's saving a broke-down black nobody." Jeremiah's weathered face cracks a sly grin as he dials a wall phone, whispering, "They think they've won, Elijah." Across the globe, a Navy SEAL base erupts in flames, a lethal shadow vanishing mid-mission. Chaos brews, but who's Elijah, and what hell's about to unleash? Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from, and if you stand for justice against corruption, hit like and subscribe for more stories that fight back. Jeremiah Banks sat in his usual booth at Rusty's Grill, the air thick with the stale scent of fryer grease and the faint tang of desperation that clung to Flint Rock like rust on old steel. Late spring sunlight filtered through cracked blinds, casting jagged stripes across the peeling linoleum floor. At 68, his hands, calloused from decades as a mechanic, cradled a chipped mug of black coffee, steam curling upward in lazy spirals. His salt and pepper hair, cropped tight in a military fade, gleamed faintly under the flickering fluorescent lights, and his broad shoulders, still strong despite the limp in his left leg, hunched slightly over the table. Around him, the diner buzzed with its usual crowd. Factory workers scarfing down eggs before the morning shift, their faces etched with exhaustion from layoffs that had gutted the city's core. Grey-haired retirees flipping through newspapers yellowed at the edges, and locals swapping gossip about who'd lost what to the latest round of evictions. The clatter of forks against plates mixed with the hiss of bacon sizzling on the grill, a comforting rhythm in a place teetering on collapse. Jeremiah's booth was a corner spot, tucked against a wall smudged with years of fingerprints, giving him a clear view of the glass door entrance and the swinging kitchen hatch. Old habits from Vietnam, where he'd earned a Bronze Star and a limp from shrapnel, never faded. He didn't need to scan for threats anymore, not in 2025. Not in a city too broken to care, but his hazel eyes flicked up every few sips anyway, catching the room in sharp, quiet sweeps. The coffee was bitter, just how he liked it, grounding him in a morning that felt ordinary until it wasn't. Outside, Flint Rock sprawled in shades of grey, boarded up storefronts, potholed streets, and smokestacks coughing ash into a sky that hadn't been blue in years. This was home, a rusted relic of the Midwest where hope was a luxury few could afford. The bell above the door jangled, sharp and sudden, cutting through the diner's hum. Two white cops stormed in, boots thudding on the floor, their navy uniforms crisp against the faded backdrop. Leading them was Sergeant Victor Hale, a wiry man in his 40s with a buzz cut so severe it showed scalp and pale blue eyes that glinted like ice under the lights. His partner, a stocky rookie named Kessler, trailed him, hand twitching near his holster. Hale's gaze locked on Jeremiah instantly, a predator spotting prey, and the room went still. Conversations died mid-sentence, forks hovered over plates, and the grill's sizzle seemed louder in the silence. Jeremiah set his mug down, slow and deliberate, his face unreadable as Hale strode over, badge flashing like a weapon. "Jeremiah Banks," Hale barked, voice loud enough to rattle the windows. "You're under arrest." He slapped a pair of cuffs on the table, metal clinking against chipped ceramic. The accusation came fast. A pawn shop robbery 3 miles east 2 hours ago, $50 and a handgun snatched from a locked case. The room erupted in murmurs, disbelief rippling through the crowd. Jeremiah robbing anything was laughable. His leg dragged from an old war wound, his truck was a rattling heap, and at 6 feet with a frame worn thin by time, he moved like every step cost him, but Hale didn't care about logic. "On your feet, old man," he sneered, leaning in close, breath sour with stale tobacco. "Time to answer for your kind's mess." The slur hit like a slap, your kind dripping with venom, a reminder of every time Jeremiah had been followed in stores, every ticket slapped on his windshield for nothing, every black kid he'd seen roughed up by Hale's crew. He'd filed complaints before 3 years back, after Hale's men pinned a 16-year-old to the pavement for looking suspicious near the factory gates. That grudge had festered, and now it had teeth. Jeremiah stood, slow, dignity in every inch, hands raised to show he wasn't fighting. "You got the wrong guy," he said, voice low and steady, the kind that carried through jungles and gunfire decades ago. Hale's lip curled. "Tell it to the judge, thief." Kessler grabbed Jeremiah's arm, yanking him toward the door. But Hale wasn't done. He shoved Jeremiah hard, sending him stumbling into a table, coffee splashing across the floor in a dark puddle. A woman gasped. A worker half stood, then sank back as Hale's glare swept the room. "Anyone else want trouble?" he snapped, daring them to move. No one did. Outside, a third cop waited by Jeremiah's truck, an old blue pickup, parked crooked in the lot, its paint chipped and hood dented. He waved a plastic bag triumphantly, a snub-nosed revolver and a wad of crumpled bills. $50 in small denominations, found under the driver's seat. The crowd pressed against the diner's windows, phones out, filming as Hale and Kessler dragged Jeremiah across the gravel, his limp worse under their grip. "Caught you red-handed," Hale said, loud for the cameras, slamming Jeremiah stomach first onto the truck's hood. The metal groaned as Hale's baton cracked down, once, twice, across Jeremiah's back, each strike punctuated by a grunt, of effort. Blood bloomed on Jeremiah's gray shirt, a thin trickle running from his nose where his face hit the steel. "That's what you get stealing from good folks," Hale spat, the word folks meaning white folks. The pawnshop owner a buddy from Hale's bowling league. Kessler smirked, cuffing Jeremiah's wrists tight enough to bruise, while the third cop, a lanky guy named Brandt, tossed the planted evidence into the squad car. "Matches the robbery haul," Brandt called, voice rehearsed, a lie polished over beers the night before. The beating wasn't quick. Hale took his time, fists and boots raining down, turning Jeremiah's breaths into ragged wheezes. A small crowd gathered, factory workers in grease-stained coveralls, a grandma clutching her purse, kids on bikes frozen mid-pedal. Some shouted, "He didn't do nothing," but most stayed silent, eyes darting to Hale's gun, knowing Flint rocks. "Rules speak up, pay later." Jeremiah's face stayed stone even as a kick split his lip, blood staining his teeth red. He'd survived ambushes in Vietnam, seen friends die in mud and fire. This was just another war, another enemy. Hale stepped back, panting, wiping sweat from his brow with a grin that said he'd won. "Load him up," he ordered, and Kessler hauled Jeremiah into the squad car, slamming the door hard enough to rock the frame. Inside Rusty's, the air was heavy, forks clinking again but slower, shame settling over the room like dust. Tasha Brooks, a 26-year-old nurse with tight braids and a fire in her brown eyes, had slipped her phone out mid-beating, filming every blow through the window's smudged glass. Her hands shook, not from fear but fury, as she tapped upload on a shaky video titled "Cops Frame Black Vet." She'd seen Jeremiah fix her mum's car for free last winter, heard him talk about fairness at community meetings. This wasn't random. This was Hale's revenge, a message to every black face in Flint Rock: step out of line, and you're next. The squad car peeled out, gravel spitting under tires, leaving a cloud of dust that hung over the lot like a shroud. Jeremiah sat in the back, head high despite the pain shooting through his ribs, staring out at the diner's neon sign flickering open in red. Hale rode shotgun, cracking his knuckles, bragging to Kessler about how easy it was. "Old bastard. Thought he could snitch on us and walk free," he said, laughing a dry, ugly sound. "Now he's done." Kessler nodded, eager to please, while Brandt drove, eyes on the road, already picturing the pawnshop owner's grateful handshake. Across town, the precinct loomed, a squat brick building with barred windows and a flag drooping in the humid air. Jeremiah was shoved through the doors, past desks cluttered with coffee cups and files, into a holding cell that stank of sweat and bleach. The guard, a paunchy guy with a buzz cut, logged him in, muttering about "another one" under his breath. Hale lingered, leaning against the bars, his shadow falling over Jeremiah like a vulture circling. "You're finished, Banks," he said, voice low and smug. "No one's digging you out of this." Jeremiah didn't answer, just sat on the concrete bench, blood drying on his chin, eyes fixed on a crack in the wall. He'd been here before, not in a cell but in a fight, outnumbered, underestimated. Hale walked away, boots echoing, thinking. He'd crushed a man who'd never break, But Jeremiah knew something Hale didn't. This wasn't the end, it was the spark. His arrest wasn't just a frame-up, it was a declaration of war on a city already bleeding, on a man who'd survived. Worse than this, on a family that didn't bow. And somewhere thousands of miles away, that spark was about to catch fire. Jeremiah Banks slumped against the cold bars of his cell, the ache in his ribs pulsing with every breath, blood crusting on his swollen lip from Sergeant Victor Hale's fists. The precinct's buzz hummed beyond the steel, phones ringing, boots, scuffing tile, officers chuckling over coffee about their latest catch. Flint Rock's morning sun barely pierced the grimy window slits, casting a dull glow on the concrete floor where he sat, hands cuffed behind him, dignity intact despite the bruises blooming purple across his dark skin. Hours crawled by, each one heavier than the last, until a commotion erupted outside the station. Voices rose, sharp and angry, a swell of noise that made the guard glance up from his clipboard, brow furrowing. Tasha Brooks, the nurse from Rusty's Grill, stood at the heart of it, her phone trembling in her grip as she uploaded the video of Jeremiah's arrest to every platform she could tap. Her braids swung as she paced the cracked sidewalk, rallying a knot of neighbors, factory workers still in their coveralls, a grandma with a cane tapping the ground like a war drum, kids clutching signs scrawled with "Free Jeremiah" in crooked marker. The footage spread like wildfire across Flint Rock's patchy internet, grainy but brutal. Hale's baton cracking down, Kessler's smirk, the planted gun waved like a trophy. Comments piled up, furious and raw. "This ain't right," and same old Flint Rock bullshit, igniting a spark in a city long numb to its own wounds. Tasha's voice cut through the crowd, fierce and unshaken. "They can't just beat an old man and walk away, not this time." Inside, a rookie cop named Daniel Pierce, barely 22 with a freckled face and a nervous tick in his jaw, watched the protest swell from a window. He joined the force 6 months ago, chasing some naive dream of justice, but Hale's crew had soured that fast. He'd seen the evidence pulled from Jeremiah's truck, the gun too clean, the cash too neatly stacked, nothing like the chaos of a real robbery haul. His gut churned as he slipped into the evidence room, heart pounding under his stiff uniform, and snapped photos of the bag with his phone. Serial number missing, bills uncreased, a setup screaming louder than the sirens outside. He sent them to Tasha anonymously, a text from a burner app. "Check this, it's wrong." The video hit critical mass by noon, racking up thousands of views, shared by every fed-up soul in Flint Rock and beyond. Reporters from the local station, WFLT, showed up with cameras, their mics shoved into Tasha's face as she demanded answers. Jeremiah Banks is a vet, a good man, and they framed him because he's black and spoke up. She shouted, her words crackling with rage. The crowd roared agreement, fists pumping, a chant building. "Let him go! Let him go!" Pressure mounted, a tidal wave crashing against the precinct's brick walls, until the chief, a balding man, named Rawls with sweat stains under his arms, caved. He called Jeremiah's lawyer, a wiry public defender named Lena Carter, who'd been fighting losing battles in Flint Rock for years. Lena stormed into the station, her heels clicking like gunfire, a stack of papers under her arm and fire in her dark eyes. She'd known Jeremiah since he fixed her old Buick for free, a favor from one survivor to another in a city that chewed up its own. "You've got no case," she snapped at Rawls, slapping Tasha's video stills and Daniel's leaked photos on his desk. "Public's watching and this stinks of a frame-up. Release him or I'll bury you in court." Rawls squirmed, glancing at Hale, who lurked in the corner, arms crossed, jaw tight. The chief knew Hale's vendetta, knew the complaints Jeremiah had filed years back, but this was spiraling beyond control. "Bail hearing now," he growled, shoving the order through. By 3 that afternoon, Jeremiah stood before Judge Miriam. Holt, a stern woman in her 50s with grey streaks in her bun and a reputation for bending to public noise. The courtroom was packed, standing room only, air thick with murmurs and the sour tang of sweat. Lena argued hard, her voice slicing through Hale's flimsy lies. No witnesses, no prints, evidence too perfect to be real. Holt's gavel banged, sharp and final. Bail set at $5,000, pending investigation, released to custody. Cheers erupted, fists raised as Jeremiah limped out, free for now, his head high despite the pain shooting through his battered frame. Tasha met him at the steps, tears in her eyes, hugging him tight as the crowd swarmed, clapping his back, calling him a hero. He made it home by dusk, a squat brick house on Elm Street, its paint peeling like old skin, windows boarded from last year's break-ins. Neighbors lined the block, cheering as he climbed the porch steps, his limp worse, but his spirit unbroken. Kids ran up, offering shy smiles, and an old man pressed a cold soda into his hand. For a moment it felt like victory, like Flint Rock might finally push back against the rot. Jeremiah sank into his worn armchair, the springs creaking under him, exhaustion settling deep in his bones. He let himself believe it was over, that truth had won, that Hale's grip had slipped. Then the night exploded. At 11, a Molotov cocktail sailed through his front window, glass shattering in a spray of shards, flames roaring across the living room floor. Jeremiah jolted upright, heart hammering, as another bottle crashed through the back door. Fire, licking up the curtains, smoke choking the air. He grabbed a blanket, beating at the blaze, coughing as heat seared his lungs, but it spread too fast. Outside, tires squealed, a black van peeling away, its taillights vanishing into the dark. He stumbled onto the porch, flames painting his face orange, and found a note nailed to the railing, scrawled in jagged marker. "Stay in your place, old man." The words burned hotter than the fire, a promise of worse to come. Neighbors rushed out, shouting, hauling buckets of water. But the house was lost, a skeleton of char and ash by midnight. Jeremiah stood in the street, shirt singed, watching his life burn, the crowd's cheers replaced by stunned silence. Hale's shadow loomed behind this, a retaliation sharper than any baton strike, a message to every black soul in Flint Rock: fight back, and you lose more than freedom. The system had cracked open just enough to let him out. But the real power, the deep roots of racism twisting through the city, struck back harder, leaving him with nothing but the clothes on his back and a fire that wouldn't quit raging in. His chest? Was this justice, letting a good man walk only to torch his world? Should Flint Rock's people keep filming, keep shouting, or is silence safer when the enemy hits this hard? Drop a comment if you think Jeremiah deserved better than this. Smash that like if you're raging at Hale's crew, and hit subscribe if you're ready to see this fight get dirty. What happens when a spark of hope gets drowned in gasoline? Does it die, or does it call down a storm? Elijah Banks crouched in the choking heat of a Somali coastal village, sweat beading on his dark skin, his 36-year-old frame coiled like a spring under tactical gear. The night sky glowed faintly with stars, fractured by smoke rising. From a pirate stronghold 300 yards ahead, a ramshackle compound of corrugated tin and crumbling concrete. His SEAL team, 6 shadows in black, moved silent as death around him, their breath steady, weapons glinting in the moonlight. Elijah, callsign Reaper, led the op, his legend etched in whispered tales, the man who'd ghosted through Kabul, leaving warlords dead without a sound, the operator who'd turned jungles into graveyards. At 6'2", muscles honed by years of unrelenting discipline, his hazel eyes, sharp as his grandfather's, scanned the target through night vision goggles, tracking guards pacing with AKs slung lazy over their shoulders. The mission was textbook: dismantle the pirate cell, seize their weapons cache, vanish before dawn. Elijah signaled, a flick of his gloved hand, and his team fanned out, planting charges along the compound's perimeter. The air buzzed with tension, the faint crash of waves against the shore masking their steps. He slid a knife from his boot, edging toward a sentry, a wiry kid barely 20, oblivious until steel met throat in a silent gurgle. The body dropped, sand soaking red, and Elijah pressed on, planting his own explosive with a click that promised chaos. 30 seconds to detonation, his team in position, when his encrypted satellite phone vibrated against his chest, a pulse that stopped him cold. Only 3 people had that number: his CO, his spotter, and Jeremiah Banks, the man who'd raised him after his parents died in a Flint Rock factory fire when he was 8. Elijah's pulse quickened as he ripped the phone free, crouching behind a rusted oil drum, the screen glowing harsh in the dark. "Pops," he answered, voice a low rasp, barely audible over the wind. Jeremiah's reply came steady, measured but laced with an edge Elijah hadn't heard since childhood. "They've gone too far, son." No details, no pleas, just 6 words that hit like a frag grenade. Elijah's mind flashed to Flint Rock, to the house on Elm Street, now ash, to the cops who'd hounded his grandfather for decades. He didn't need more. He knew. "Hold tight," Elijah said, clipping the phone shut, his jaw tightening as the first charge blew, a fireball tearing through the compound's east wall. Shouts erupted, gunfire spraying wild as pirates stumbled from their bunks, but Elijah was already moving, not toward the fight but away. His second-in-command, a lean Texan named Riggs, grabbed his arm, eyes wide under his goggles. "Reaper, we're live here. Where you going?" Elijah shook him off, stripping gear mid-stride, shedding rifle, vest, everything but his knife and sidearm. "Family," he said, the word final, and Riggs froze, knowing better than to argue with a ghost mid-haunt. The team faltered, stunned, as Elijah vanished into the dunes, a shadow blending with the night. Charges popped like fireworks behind him, the stronghold collapsing in flames and screams, but his focus was singular, a missile locked on Flint Rock. He hitched a ride on a supply chopper 20 miles out, bribing the pilot with a wad of cash from his boot, then caught a cargo plane from Mogadishu to Dubai, silent the whole way, replaying Jeremiah's voice on loop. By dawn, he was airborne over the Atlantic, a red-eye to Chicago, then a rental car screaming down I-75 toward Michigan, 16 hours total from sand to asphalt, his hands white-knuckled on the wheel. Back in Flint Rock, Sergeant Victor Hale sprawled across a cracked vinyl stool at the Iron Tap, a dive bar stinking of spilled beer and cigarette butts, its neon sign buzzing faintly outside. The jukebox whined some country tune about lost love, but Hale wasn't listening. He slammed a shot of whiskey, glass clinking hard on the stained oak counter, his buzz cut glistening with sweat under the dim lights. Around him, a handful of off-duty cops and locals nursed drinks, their laughter jagged, eyes darting to Hale like he was a king holding court. "That uppity vet thought he could play hero," Hale slurred, voice thick with booze and spite, leaning toward Kessler, who nodded like a dog waiting for scraps. "Burned his ass out, showed him who runs this town." Kessler grinned, a crooked slash across his doughy face, swirling his beer. "Heard he's hiding now, scared shitless. Should have known better than to snitch." Hale laughed, a barking sound that turned heads, then drained another shot. Amber, liquid glinting as it caught the bar's flicker. "Old bastard's done. No one's dumb enough to dig for him now." The bar hummed with agreement, a chorus of grunts and nods from men who'd seen Hale twist Flint Rock's rules for years, always walking away clean. He'd torched Jeremiah's house himself, lit the match with a smirk, knowing the chief would look the other way, knowing the city's silence was bought with fear. Across the room, a wiry guy in a faded hoodie nursed a soda, ear cocked toward Hale's rant. Tommy Vance, a mechanic who'd fixed Jeremiah's truck last month, kept his head down, fingers tight around his glass. He'd seen the fire, heard the rumors, knew Hale's crew was poison. The bragging grated, each word a nail in a coffin. Tommy couldn't unsee. He slipped out the back, stool creaking, unnoticed by the drunks, and melted into the night, footsteps fading down an alley slick with rain. By morning he was gone, vanished from Flint Rock, no trace left but a half-finished soda and a bar stool still warm. Hale didn't notice, didn't care, too deep in his victory to smell the storm brewing. Elijah hit Flint Rock's edges as dusk painted the sky bruise purple, the rental car's tires humming over potholed streets. He passed rusted factories, their smokestacks clawing at the horizon, and rows of sagging houses, windows dark or boarded. The air was heavy, humid, thick with the rot of a city left to die. He ditched the car 3 blocks from a safe house Tasha Brooks had texted him about, a crumbling duplex on Pine Street, its paint flaking like dead leaves. Jeremiah waited inside, sitting on a moth-eaten couch, a single bulb casting harsh shadows across his battered face. Bruises ringed his eyes, his shirt singed at the edges, but his posture was ramrod straight, a soldier still. "Pops," Elijah said, voice soft but steel-hard, crossing the room in 3 strides. Jeremiah stood slower, wincing as his ribs protested, and gripped Elijah's shoulder, a silent pact passing between them. "They burned me out," Jeremiah said, nodding to a duffel bag of salvaged clothes, all he had left. "Hale's crew. Planted a gun, beat me bloody, torched the house when I walked free." Elijah's eyes darkened, a storm gathering behind them, as Jeremiah pulled a cracked photo from his pocket. Him and Elijah, 10 years back, fishing on Lake Huron, smiles wide. "They think I'm broken," Jeremiah added, voice steady. "They don't know you." Elijah sank onto the couch, cracking his knuckles, the sound sharp in the quiet. "Who's pulling Hale's strings?" he asked, already piecing it together. The firebombing was too bold, too clean for a lone cop's grudge. Jeremiah's jaw tightened. "Conrad Voss, real estate shark, been buying up black blocks cheap, pushing us out. Hale's his muscle." Elijah nodded, mind racing, mapping targets, exits, moves. He'd hunted worse than this, toppled empires in shadows, but this was personal, a war on his blood. The room hummed with unspoken plans, the air electric as night deepened outside. Somewhere in Flint Rock, Hale stumbled from the iron tap, whiskey sour on his breath, laughing into the dark, oblivious to the eyes watching from a rooftop 2 streets over. Elijah's silhouette crouched there, a predator sizing up prey, his knife catching the moon's glint. The call had been made, the line crossed, and now the Reaper was home. Hale's world was about to burn hotter than any Molotov, and he didn't even know it yet. Elijah Banks rolled into Flint Rock, under a sky bruised with dusk. The rental car's engine growling as he pulled up to the safe house on Pine Street, a sagging duplex with shutters hanging like broken teeth. He stepped out, boots crunching gravel, his 6'2" frame taut with purpose, muscles flexing under a plain black hoodie that hid the scars of a dozen wars. Jeremiah Banks waited inside, perched on a couch that reeked of mildew, his bruised face lit harsh by a bare bulb swinging from a frayed cord. The air was thick with dust, and the faint tang of smoke still clinging to Jeremiah's singed shirt, a reminder of the fire that had gutted his life. Elijah crossed the room, eyes locking with his grandfather's, a silent steel passing between them as Jeremiah gripped his shoulder, steady despite the wince of pain from his cracked ribs. "They burned me out, Elijah," Jeremiah said, voice gravelly but firm, nodding to a duffel stuffed with salvaged clothes, all that remained of decades in Flint Rock. "Hale's crew, but it's bigger. Conrad Voss, real estate kingpin, been snatching black blocks cheap, pushing us out for condos." Elijah sank onto the couch, cracking his knuckles, the sound snapping through the quiet. He'd hunted warlords, toppled cartels, but this was home, this was blood, and the rage simmering in his chest was colder, sharper. "What's Voss got on Hale?" he asked, mind already mapping the enemy's web. Jeremiah's jaw tightened. "Money, power. Hale's his dog, frames us, clears the land, that pawnshop job. A setup to scare folks into selling." Elijah pulled out a burner phone, texting Tasha Brooks, the nurse who'd filmed Jeremiah's arrest. She arrived 20 minutes later, braids swinging, brown eyes blazing, as she hauled in a laptop and a stack of papers she'd dug up from city records. "Voss owns half Flint Rock through shell companies," she said, spreading documents across a rickety table, her voice trembling with fury. "He's got deeds, eviction notices, all tied to Hale's busts. Black families losing homes. Then Voss builds luxury towers." Elijah scanned the pages, his SEAL-trained mind clocking patterns, addresses matching police reports, dates aligning with arrests, a machine grinding down a community under the guise of progress. They worked fast, Elijah's precision meshing with Tasha's fire. She'd kept the video live, racking up views, and now they had more. Grainy photos from Daniel Pierce, the rookie cop, showing the planted gun and cash, plus tax filings linking Voss to offshore accounts. Jeremiah sat quiet, watching his grandson turn war into strategy, pride flickering in his bruised eyes. By midnight, they had a plan. Tasha called a reporter from WFLT, a scrappy kid named Jamal Carter, who'd been sniffing around Flint Rock's corruption for months. He met them at a diner across town, neon buzzing open in the window, his notepad already smudged with ink as Elijah slid the evidence over a sticky table. Jamal broke the story at dawn, a live broadcast from the station's steps, his voice cutting through the humid air. Conrad Voss, Flint Rock's real estate mogul, tied to police corruption framing black residents, including Vietnam vet Jeremiah Banks. Evidence shows planted guns, forced evictions, all to clear land for profit. The screen flashed Tasha's video, Daniel's photos, and Voss's shell company filings, a gut punch to the city, waking up to coffee and outrage. Crowds gathered outside City Hall by noon, a sea of fists and signs, chants rolling like thunder, "Stop the frame! Stop the shame!" Jeremiah watched from the safe house, a cracked TV flickering the scene, his chest tight with something like hope. The pressure hit hard. Chief Rawls, sweating through his uniform, hauled Hale into his office, slamming the broadcast transcript on his desk. "You're suspended, Victor. This is a goddamn mess." Hale's pale eyes narrowed, fists clenching, but he couldn't argue, with the footage looping on every phone in Flint Rock. By 3, the mayor, a slick suit named Paul Grayson, called a press conference, his tie crooked, voice shaky. "Sergeant Hale is off duty pending investigation. We're reviewing Voss's projects. Justice will prevail." Cheers erupted outside City Hall, horns blaring, as folks hugged and wept, thinking the tide had turned. Jeremiah limped to the safe house window, peering through warped blinds, letting himself believe it might stick. Elijah stayed sharp, posted on the roof with binoculars, tracking cop cars rolling slow through the streets. He knew victories like this were fragile, knew men like Hale didn't fold easy. The crowd thinned by dusk, Flint Rock exhaling like it had won. But Elijah's gut twisted, a soldier's instinct screaming louder than the cheers. He was right. At 10, as Jeremiah dozed on the couch, the safe house door splintered inward, 4 masked men in black bursting through, silenced pistols, glinting under the bulb's glare. Elijah leapt from the roof, hitting the ground silent, but he was too late to stop them. They grabbed Jeremiah, zip-tying his wrists, a fist cracking his jaw as he woke swinging. "Voss says hello," one growled, voice muffled behind a ski mask, dragging him toward a van idling in the alley. Elijah charged, knife flashing, but a 5th man blindsided him, a baton slamming his shoulder, forcing him back. Tires screeched as the van peeled out, Jeremiah's muffled shout cut off by the slam of its doors. Elijah staggered up, blood trickling from his arm, finding a burner phone dropped in the scuffle. It buzzed, a video loading. Jeremiah, bound, to a chair in a dark room, Voss's voice off-screen, smooth and cold. "You thought you'd win, Banks? Your grandson's next." Elijah's breath hissed through clenched teeth, the screen's light carving shadows across his face. The suspension, the broadcast, the crowd, it was all a feint, a crack in the wall Voss had slammed shut with a fist of his own. Hale might be down, but Voss was the head, and he'd struck back harder, snatching Jeremiah from under Elijah's nose. The safe house stood empty now, papers scattered, table overturned, a battlefield after a rout. Elijah gripped the phone, replaying the video, memorizing every detail. The concrete walls, the faint hum of machinery, a clue to where they'd taken his grandfather. Flint Rock celebrated a hollow win, horns still honking in the distance, but Elijah knew the truth. This wasn't justice, it was a trap sprung wide, and Voss had played them all. The city thought Hale's badge was the prize, but the real monster had teeth deeper than one cop's hate, and now Jeremiah was the bait. Elijah slipped into the night, a shadow with a purpose, the Reaper waking fully, ready to hunt. Voss had made his move, but he didn't know what was coming, didn't know the storm he'd called down by touching family. Can a city cheer while a hero's snatched away? Or is that just noise masking the real fight? Drop a comment one if you think Elijah's about to turn Flint Rock upside down, smash that like if Voss's counterpunch has you boiling, and hit subscribe if you're locked in for this war's next blow. What happens when a seal's family's caged? Does the hunter become the hunted, or does the whole damn game burn? Elijah Banks stood in the shattered safe house on Pine Street, the air thick with the stench of splintered wood, and the echo of Jeremiah's muffled shout fading into silence. The van's taillights had vanished down the alley, leaving a burner, phone glowing on the floor, its video of Jeremiah bound and bloodied, looping Voss's smug threat. "Your grandson's next." Elijah's shoulder throbbed where the baton had struck. A dull ache under his hoodie, but his hazel eyes burned cold, seal instincts snapping into overdrive. He pocketed the phone, replaying the audio in his head. Concrete walls, a low machinery. Clues to a location. Flint Rock sprawled dark beyond the busted door, a city asleep to the war brewing in its gut, and Elijah moved, a shadow, with a mission. He tracked the van's route on instinct, cutting through back streets slick with late spring drizzle, dodging streetlights that buzzed like dying flies. The hum from the video gnawed at him, industrial, familiar, pointing to the old steel mill district, a graveyard of rusted hulks 3 miles north. He hit the edge of town in 20 minutes, boots silent on cracked asphalt, the abandoned factory. Looming ahead, a sprawl of corrugated tin and broken windows, its smokestack a jagged finger against the moon. 6 men guarded it, silhouettes pacing tight loops, AR-15s slung across their chests. Voss's mercenaries, not cops, their movements too crisp, too trained. Elijah crouched behind a stack of rotting pallets, breath steady, counting their steps, mapping their blind spots. The first went down fast, Elijah's knife slicing through the dark, a silent arc that dropped the guard mid-stride, blood pooling black on the gravel. The second turned, rifle lifting, but Elijah was on him, snapping his neck with a twist that cracked like dry wood. 2 more fell before the alarm could sound, one choking on his own silenced scream, the other crumpling from a knee shattered by Elijah's boot. The 5th and 6th paired up smarter, sweeping the perimeter with flashlights, but Elijah rolled a pebble into their path, a distraction that split them. He took the 5th with a chokehold, dropping him limp, then buried his blade in the 6th's chest, the man's gasp lost to the wind howling through the mill's guts. Inside, the factory was a maze of rust and shadows, machinery hulking silent. Under decades of dust, the hum louder now, a generator thrumming deep in the core. Elijah navigated by feel, ducking pipes, stepping over collapsed beams, until he found Jeremiah in a cavernous bay, zip-tied to a metal chair, blood dripping from a gash on his forehead onto the concrete floor. 2 more guards loomed over him, one jabbing a pistol into his ribs, the other pacing with a radio crackling static. "Tell us where your grandson's at, old man," the pistol guy snarled, his buzz cut gleaming under a hanging bulb. Jeremiah spat blood, grinning through split lips. "You'll meet him soon enough." Elijah struck like a storm breaking, bursting from the dark, his knife slashing the radio man's throat in a spray of red that painted the wall. The second guard spun, firing wild, bullets pinging off steel as Elijah rolled, closing the gap, and drove his fist into the man's windpipe, crushing it. The guard dropped, gurgling, and Elijah cut Jeremiah free, hands steady despite the chaos. "Can you walk, Pops?" he asked, voice low, urgent. Jeremiah nodded, grimacing as he stood. 68 years and a beating not enough to kill his fight. "I've had worse in Nam," he rasped, leaning on Elijah's arm as they moved. They slipped into a side corridor, Elijah's mind racing, piecing together Voss's game. Jeremiah filled the gaps, voice hoarse but clear. "Voss wants land. Son frames black folks, scares them into selling cheap. This mill's his next buy, gonna flip it for millions once we're gone." Elijah's jaw clenched, the scope widening. Hale's arrest, the fire, now this, all threads in a web strangling Flint Rock's black heart. They needed more than escape. They needed to burn Voss down. Elijah pulled the burner phone, texting. Tasha Brooks, a clipped message, "FBI, Voss Mill now." She'd know what to do, her fire already proven. They hit the exit, a rusted door creaking open to the night, when the world erupted. A car bomb detonated 50 yards away, the safe. House they'd fled hours ago. A fireball tearing through Pine Street's quiet. The shockwave rocked the mill, dust raining from the rafters, and Elijah shoved Jeremiah behind a steel crate as glass shattered somewhere above. Flames lit the horizon, orange tongues licking the sky. A message from Voss. No sanctuary, no mercy. Sirens wailed in the distance, too late to save what was already ash, and Elijah's phone buzzed. Tasha's reply, "FBI's got it. Stay alive." But Voss wasn't done. Hale, reinstated by a greased Mayor Grayson, hit the airwaves minutes later, his voice crackling over every radio in Flint Rock. Elijah Banks, wanted terrorist, bombed a residential block, armed and dangerous. Full manhunt, authorized. The lie spread fast, squad cars screaming through the streets, lights flashing red and blue, a net tightening around the mill district. Elijah cursed under his breath, pulling Jeremiah deeper into the shadows, the old man's limp slowing them as boots pounded closer. "They're pinning it on you," Jeremiah said, eyes hard despite the pain. "Voss owns the mayor too." Elijah scanned the yard, spotting a drainage ditch 50 feet west. A slim chance at evasion. They moved low and fast, Elijah half carrying Jeremiah, the old vet's breath ragged but his will iron. Flashlights swept the mill's edge, Hale's voice barking orders over a megaphone. "Flush him out! Shoot on sight!" Bullets chewed. The dirt as cops closed in, a hail of lead that forced Elijah to dive, shielding Jeremiah behind a rusted tractor. He returned fire, 2 quick shots from his sidearm dropping a silhouette, buying seconds. The ditch loomed, a muddy lifeline, and Elijah hauled Jeremiah down into it, water soaking them to the bone as they crawled, unseen, into the night. They surfaced a mile out, shivering in a copse of skeletal trees, Flint Rock's skyline smoldering behind them. Elijah's mind churned. The rescue was a win, but the bomb and manhunt flipped the board, Voss's counterpunch landing harder than Hale's fists ever could. Jeremiah coughed, blood flecking his lips, but his gaze was steady. "They think they've got us running," he said, wiping his mouth. "They don't know running's how we fight." Elijah nodded, checking his mag, 6 rounds left, a knife and a phone with 1 bar of signal. The FBI might move on Voss, but Hale's manhunt was a noose, and every step now was a gamble. The mill faded into the dark as sirens screamed, a city turned hunting ground. Elijah had saved Jeremiah, torn him from Voss's claws, but the cost was steep. A terrorist label, a burned safe house, a war escalated beyond one man's grudge. Voss's machine hummed louder, its gears grinding down Flint Rock's black soul, and Hale's voice echoed in the distance, a predator unleashed. Elijah tightened his grip on Jeremiah's arm, the Reaper's calm settling over him. This wasn't escape. It was a regroup, a breath before the plunge. Voss had raised the stakes, but he'd misjudged the storm he'd woken, a storm that didn't just run, it hunted. Elijah Banks crouched in the muddy ditch, rain drumming on his back, Jeremiah shivering beside him as Flint Rock's sirens wailed in the distance, a chorus of chaos chasing the night. The old man's breath rasped, blood streaking his face from the mill beating, but his eyes burned steady. 68 years of resilience holding firm. Elijah's shoulder ached, baton bruise pulsing under his soaked hoodie, his sidearm down to 6 rounds, knife slick with water and blood. They'd slipped Hale's manhunt, crawled through the filth to a crumbling garage 2 miles south, its roof sagging under years of neglect, a temporary shield from the storm and the cops. Inside, Elijah propped Jeremiah against a rusted toolbox, peeling off his wet shirt to check the damage. Cracked ribs, fresh cuts, but alive, still fighting. "We need to hit Voss harder," Elijah said, voice low, cutting through the drip of leaks hitting the concrete floor. Jeremiah nodded, wincing as he shifted. "He's got the city locked. Hale's just the start." Elijah pulled Tasha Brooks and Daniel Pierce into the fight, texting coordinates from a burner phone, 1 bar flickering in the gloom. Tasha arrived. First, her hatchback rattling into the garage, braids damp, laptop glowing as she set up on a workbench. Daniel followed, uniform swapped for a hoodie, freckled face pale but set, his rookie nerves steeled by the mill's truth. "I'm in," he said, voice shaky but sure, dropping a stack of precinct files he'd swiped, arrest logs, property seizures, all tied to Voss's shell companies. They dug in, piecing together a sledgehammer of proof. Tasha hacked city records, her fingers flying, pulling deeds and tax filings that showed Voss's empire. Black neighborhoods gutted, sold cheap under duress, flipped for millions in luxury builds. Daniel's files linked Hale's busts to those sales, a pattern of planted evidence and beatings. Jeremiah's arrest just 1 cog in the machine. Elijah cross-checked it all, his SEAL mind turning data into a weapon, spotting Voss's HQ, a glass tower downtown, gleaming over Flint Rock's decay. By dawn they had it, a dossier of corruption irrefutable, enough to crack the city wide open. Tasha suggested the city council meeting, a public stage to drop the bomb. Elijah agreed, plotting the move like a raid, timing, exits, fallback. They rolled out at noon, Elijah driving a borrowed pickup, Jeremiah in the passenger seat, Tasha and Daniel tailing in her car. The council chamber was a sterile box, wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lights buzzing over rows of folding chairs packed with suits and citizens. Mayor Grayson stood at the podium, mid-speech about progress, his tie still crooked from Hale's suspension, when Elijah strode in, boots thudding, dossier under his arm. The room hushed, eyes wide, as Jeremiah limped behind, bruises stark against his dark skin, a living testament. "This ends now," Elijah said, voice cutting the air like a blade, slamming the papers onto the council table. Tasha projected the files on a screen, deeds and arrests flashing big. Voss's name in bold, Hale's signature on falsified reports, millions laundered through fake firms. "Conrad Voss owns your cops, your land, your city. He framed my grandfather, torched his house, bombed a street to keep it quiet." Gasps rippled, council members squirming as Jeremiah stepped up, voice steady despite the pain. "I'm one man, but they're killing Flint Rock's black soul. You gonna let that stand?" The room erupted, shouts of fury, fists banging seats, a tide turning. Grayson stammered, sweat beading on his brow, but the evidence was a noose tightening fast. "We'll investigate," he croaked, voice drowned by booze. Councilwoman Lena Hayes, a black woman with steel-gray hair, stood, slamming her gavel. "Voss is done. Project suspended. Full audit now." Cheers exploded, phones filming as Elijah's proof hit social media, trending in minutes. "You know, Flint Rock fights back." By dusk, FBI vans rolled into town, agents cuffing Voss at his tower, his tailored suit rumpled, face pale as they hauled him out. Hale's suspension stuck, his badge yanked again, and Flint Rock danced, streets alive with horns and hugs, thinking the beast was slain. Elijah watched from the garage, Jeremiah beside him, a cracked radio spitting news of Voss's arrest. The old man smiled, faint but real, letting hope creep in. "We got him, son," he said, clapping Elijah's shoulder. Tasha called, voice crackling with triumph. "They're tearing Voss apart online. We won." Daniel, still jumpy, grinned. Over a burner line. Chief sweating bullets, it's over. For a moment, Elijah let it sit, the weight lifting, the city breathing free. They'd cracked the machine, exposed the rot, and Flint Rock roared with life, a third victory snatched from the jaws of hell. Then the night shattered. At 9, as Elijah stepped outside for air, a sniper's bullet ripped through the dark, punching Daniel Pierce's chest as he crossed the precinct lot. He dropped, blood blooming red on asphalt, eyes wide in shock, dead before he hit the ground. Sirens screamed, cops swarming, but the shooter was smoke gone into the shadows. Minutes later, Hale's voice hit the radio, smug and sharp. "Elijah Banks killed one of ours. Terrorist confirmed." The lie spun fast. Precinct logs doctored, a rifle planted in the pickup's bed, tying Elijah to a murder he didn't commit. Flint Rock flipped in an instant. Hale's crew, backed by Voss's cash even from jail, raided black neighborhoods, boots kicking doors, dragging dozens into vans under public safety pretexts. Screams echoed down Elm Street, kids yanked from beds, elders cuffed in pajamas, a pogrom cloaked as justice. Elijah raced back to the garage, finding Jeremiah pale, radio clutched tight, Tasha's voice breaking over the line. "They're rounding us up, Elijah. It's chaos." Voss's arrest hadn't stopped him. His network flexed, bailing him out by midnight, his smirk flashing on WFLT as he walked free, suit pristine again. Elijah's fists clenched, knuckles white, the victory turning to ash in his mouth. Daniel's blood, the raids, Voss's grin, it was a counterpunch that dwarfed the bomb, a system rigged so deep even cuffs couldn't hold it. Jeremiah stood limping but fierce, eyes locked on his grandson. "They think we're done," he said, voice a growl. "They're wrong." Elijah nodded, grabbing his knife, the Reaper waking again. Flint Rock burned with rage and fear, a sea. City betrayed, and the war wasn't over, it was exploding. Did Voss's bailout prove money beats truth, or is Elijah's fight just heating up? Drop a comment if you think Flint Rock's raids show the real enemy's face. Smash that like if Daniel's death has you furious, and hit subscribe if you're riding this storm to the end. When a sniper's bullet flips the script, does it break the resistance or forge a blade sharper than ever? And Elijah Banks stood in the garage's shadowed corner, rain hammering the tin roof, the news of Daniel Pierce's sniper death crackling over a battered radio clutched in Jeremiah's hands. Flint Rock streets burned with chaos beyond the walls, sirens wailing as Hale's crew raided black neighborhoods, doors splintering, screams cutting the night. Elijah's fists clenched, knuckles popping, his hazel eyes narrowing to slits as Tasha's voice broke through a burner phone static. "They're rounding up everyone, Elijah. Kids, elders, it's a massacre." Jeremiah's bruised face tightened, 68 years of grit meeting a fresh wound. Daniel's blood a stain neither could shake. The third victory had crumbled, Voss's bailout and Hale's lies a gut punch. That left them reeling. But Elijah didn't bend, he broke toward action. He went dark, slipping from the garage into Flint Rock's underbelly, a ghost in soaked black, knife sheathed, sidearm tucked low. Voss's empire wasn't just land. It was cash, a river of dirty money flowing through warehouses and front businesses. Elijah zeroed in on the biggest, a sprawling storage depot on the riverfront, its floodlights buzzing over crates stamped with fake logos, laundering millions from Voss's gentrification racket. He hit it at midnight, scaling a chain-link fence, rain masking his steps as guards patrolled with rifles slung loose. The first dropped silent, Elijah's arm locking his throat until he slumped. The second caught a knee to the spine, crumpled without a scream. Inside, he planted charges, military-grade plastique from a SEAL stash he'd buried years back, and lit the fuse. The depot erupted, a fireball clawing the sky, cash and records incinerating in a roar that shook the riverbank. Flames danced orange. Across the water, a beacon of defiance. And Elijah watched from a rooftop half a mile out, rain streaking his face, the heat a distant pulse against his skin. Voss's cash flow choked, millions gone in smoke, a wound that had bleed him dry. By dawn, WFLT ran the story wild. Mystery blaze guts Voss-linked warehouse arson suspected. Flint Rock buzzed, whispers of payback spreading, but Elijah wasn't done. He needed the city to rise. Jeremiah took the fight public, limping to a community center on Oak Street, its cracked walls packed with furious residents, faces lit by flickering bulbs. Tasha had rallied them, her braids swinging as she shoved a megaphone into Jeremiah's hands. He stood tall despite the pain, voice booming over the crowd's murmurs. "They killed Daniel, raided our homes, burned our lives 'cause we're black and we fought back. Voss thinks we'll break. You gonna let him?" The room roared, fists pumping, a tide of rage swelling. "Stand up," Jeremiah shouted, blood flecking his lips from the effort. "They can't take us all." Phones filmed, the plea hitting the internet, viral in hours. Flint Rock rises trending as thousands shared it, a call to arms echoing beyond the city's rusted edges. Voss struck back, his machine flexing even from a jail cell he'd never truly left. By noon, a judge he'd bought years back, a weasel named Edgar Klein, signed an emergency curfew, locking down black districts with militarized police. Checkpoints sprang up, Humvees rolling slow, officers in riot gear barking orders through megaphones. "Back inside now!" Families huddled behind curtains, kids crying as boots thudded past, a prison city carved from Flint Rock's heart. Elijah watched from a rooftop, binoculars tracking the lockdown, his jaw tight as the noose squeezed. Jeremiah's broadcast had lit a fire, but Voss doused it with iron, proving money and power outran truth every time. Then the real blow landed. At dusk, as Elijah scouted a checkpoint breach, a drone whirred overhead, its hum cutting through the rain's drone. He dove. Too late. A missile streaked down, slamming the community center mid-protest, a thunderclap of concrete and screams. The blast tore through Oak Street, 12 dead instantly, bodies buried under rubble. A mother shielding her son, an elder mid-prayer, Tasha's cousin among them. her braids singed black in the wreckage. Flames licked the ruins, smoke choking. The sky as survivors wailed, dragging the wounded free. WFLT cut in, Hale's voice smug over the feed. Rioters bombed their own, Banks's work, curfew stays. Elijah raced to the scene, boots pounding asphalt, arriving as paramedics pulled charred remains from the debris. Jeremiah was there, coughing through smoke, blood fresh on his hands from digging, his eyes hollow but fierce. "They're slaughtering." "Your son," he rasped, gripping Elijah's arm, the old vet's strength fraying but unbroken. Elijah's breath hitched, the drone's precision a military strike, Voss's doing pinned on him with Hale's lie. 12 dead, a dozen families. Gutted? And Flint Rock's black core bleeding out under curfew's weight. The warehouse hit had hurt Voss. Jeremiah's call had roused the city, but this was war now, a massacre dwarfing every blow before. They retreated to a basement hideout, a damp hole under a boarded-up bar, its walls slick with mold, a single bulb swaying overhead. Tasha joined them, tears cutting tracks through soot on her face, her laptop cracked but alive. "They're killing us to win," she said, voice breaking, pulling up drone footage leaked from a whistleblower. Voss's signature on the order funneled through a shell firm. Elijah's fists balled, the seal in him mapping targets, but the man in him felt the weight. Daniel's death now this, a toll rising too fast. Jeremiah sank onto a crate, ribs screaming, but his voice held steel. "They think massacres stop us, they don't know Flint Rock." Elijah cracked his knuckles, the sound sharp in the damp air, replaying the drone's hum, the blast's roar. He'd torched Voss's cache, given Jeremiah a stage, but Voss's machine didn't just bend. It broke bones, spilled blood, turned hope to ash. The curfew locked them in, the drone strike locked them down, and Hale's lies locked them out. A triple blow that crushed their third win into dust. Flint Rock's streets lay silent under martial law, but the basement hummed with defiance. 3 souls against an empire. Elijah sharpened his knife, eyes on the blade's edge, the Reaper waking to a new hunt. Voss had escalated, but he'd misjudged the breaking point, not theirs, his. Elijah Banks crouched in the basement hideout, the damp air heavy with mold, and the bitter tang of smoke clinging to Tasha Brooks's cracked laptop screen. Jeremiah Banks sat on a splintered crate, 68 years etched in the bruises darkening. His face blood crusting his hands from digging through the drone strike's rubble. The hum of Flint Rock's curfew loomed outside. A city locked under Voss's iron grip, 12 souls lost to the blast still echoing in their ears. Elijah's knife gleamed under the swaying bulb, his hazel eyes tracing its edge as Tasha pulled up the leaked drone footage, Voss's signature glaring in black ink on the kill order. "He's slaughtering us," she whispered, tears cutting. Through soot, her voice a raw wound. Jeremiah's jaw tightened, ribs aching, but his gaze held steel. "Not if we gut him first." Elijah moved fast, a seal's precision cutting through grief. He tracked Voss's lieutenant, a hulking ex-merc named Bryce Tanner, to a dive motel on Flint Rock's edge, its neon sign flickering vacancy in the rain-soaked dark. Tanner was Voss's muscle, the link between cash and carnage, and Elijah needed him broken. He hit the room at midnight, door splintering under his boot, catching Tanner mid-whiskey pour, glass shattering on stained carpet. The man lunged, 6'4" of scarred meat swinging a chair, but Elijah dodged, knife flashing, pinning Tanner's arm to the wall with a crunch. "Talk," Elijah growled, twisting the blade, blood dripping hot. Tanner gasped, sweat beading, spilling it all. Voss's orders, the drone, the curfew, a network of dirty brass keeping him untouchable. Elijah recorded it, phone steady, Tanner's confession a sledgehammer, names, dates, payoffs, the drone strike pinned on Voss with cold. Proof. He left Tanner zip-tied groaning and slipped into the night texting Tasha the file. She worked magic, blasting it to national news by dawn, CNN and MSNBC picking it up, headlines screaming, "Flint Rock drone massacre tied to Conrad Voss." The video hit millions, Tanner's gruff voice detailing the slaughter, Voss's signature flashing, a smoking gun no bailout could dodge. Protests erupted nationwide, DC to Detroit, signs reading, "Justice for Flint Rock," a roar Voss couldn't. Mute. FBI vans swarmed again, agents storming Voss's tower, cuffing him mid-call, his smug grin faltering as they dragged him out. Hale's badge hit the dirt too, Chief Rawls suspending him again, precinct doors locked as feds seized files. Flint Rock streets buzzed, curfew cracking under public fury, folks spilling out chanting Jeremiah's name like a war cry. Tasha called Elijah from the basement, voice trembling with hope. "They've got Voss in DC, Elijah. Hale's done. We're winning." Jeremiah stood, limping to a cracked window, peering at the city stirring alive, a faint smile breaking through his pain. "Fourth time's the charm, son," he said, clapping Elijah's shoulder, letting himself believe the beast was caged. Elijah nodded, knife sheathed, a rare breath easing his chest, the nation's rage a shield around them. Then the hammer fell. At dusk, as Flint Rock cheered, a prison riot erupted in DC, orchestrated by Voss's insiders, guards bribed with stacks of laundered cash. Hale walked free, slipping through chaos, a black SUV waiting curbside, his buzz cut gleaming under streetlights. He hit Flint Rock by midnight, vengeance burning in his pale eyes, rallying a lynch mob of rogue cops and white hoods, 30 strong, armed with bats, guns, and Molotovs. They stormed Jeremiah's new hideout, a shack on Cedar Lane. Tasha had secured, its windows boarded tight. Elijah was out, scouting Voss's next move when the mob hit, tires screeching, flames roaring as bottles crashed through the roof. Jeremiah woke to smoke, coughing blood, ribs screaming as he grabbed a rusted pipe, swinging at shadows bursting. Through the door, Hale led them, baton raised, grinning like a jackal. "Thought you'd win, old man?" he snarled, cracking Jeremiah's arm, bones snapping loud in the chaos. The mob torched the shack, fire-licking walls, a pyre for their hate, chanting slurs as they dragged Jeremiah outside, beaten, barely conscious, flames painting his face orange. Tasha raced in, alerted by a neighbor's call, finding the shack. Ablaze, Jeremiah gone, a note nailed to a tree. "Banks Burns, next is you." Elijah hit the scene at dawn, boots pounding ash, the shack a smoldering husk. Tasha sobbing beside it, her laptop smashed in the dirt. His chest heaved, rage boiling cold, the confession, the arrests, the protests, all dust now. Voss's machine. Flexing harder from behind bars. Hale's mob had struck while Flint Rock slept, a counterpunch that dwarfed the drone, turning victory to cinders. Jeremiah was alive. Elijah knew it, felt it in his bones, but taken, a prize in Voss's game. The city's cheers faded, curfew snapping back, fear choking the streets again. Elijah knelt in the ash, gripping the note, the reaper's calm settling, deep, a storm brewing in his silence. Can a confession topple an empire when its claws dig this deep? Or is Elijah's war just bleeding out? Drop a comment one if you think Hale's mob proves Flint Rock's fight ain't over. Smash that like if Jeremiah's fire has you raging, and hit subscribe if you're locked in for this blood-soaked stand. When a lynch mob torches hope, does it snuff the flame or light a fuse to something unstoppable? Elijah Banks knelt in the smoldering ruins of the Cedar Lane shack, ash gritty under his boots, the note, "Banks Burns, next is you," crumpled in his fist. Dawn broke grey over Flint Rock, rain hissing on embers, the air thick with the stench of charred wood and gasoline from Hale's mob. Tasha Brooks stood beside him, her braids matted with soot, eyes red from sobs, her smashed laptop a useless heap in the mud. Jeremiah was gone, snatched by the lynch mob but alive. Elijah felt it, a soldier's gut screaming louder than the silence. His hazel eyes traced the wreckage, seal instincts kicking in, mapping tire tracks in the dirt, a trail to his grandfather. The fourth victory had been a mirage, Voss's machine striking back with fire and blood, and now the hunt was on. He followed the tracks, a muddy scar cutting east toward the riverfront, Hale's crew too sloppy to cover their retreat. They led to Voss's mansion, a gleaming monstrosity perched on a bluff, all glass and steel overlooking Flint Rock's decay, its floodlights slicing the drizzle. Elijah scouted from a ridge, rain streaking his hoodie, spotting 10 guards. Ex-military, heavy-set, pacing with rifles, Voss's private army. He moved at dusk, a shadow in the storm, scaling the perimeter wall, knife between his teeth, The first guard fell silent, throat slit mid-yawn. The second crumpled from a snapped neck, rifle clattering soft on wet grass. Elijah carved through them, relentless, bodies dropping like flies, blood mixing with rain. 6 down before the alarm could sound. Inside, the mansion was a cathedral of wealth. Marble floors gleaming, chandeliers dripping crystal, the air sharp, with cigar smoke and leather. Elijah navigated tight, ducking cameras until he hit the basement. A steel door bolted shut, the hum of a generator buzzing behind it. He blew the lock with a scavenged frag grenade, shrapnel chewing concrete, and stormed in, finding Jeremiah chained to a pipe, shirt torn, fresh bruises blooming purple across his dark skin. Voss stood over him, tailored suit pristine despite. Jail, a .45 in his hand, his silver hair slicked back, eyes glinting cold. 2 guards flanked him, pistols raised, but Elijah was faster, knife flashing, burying it in one's chest, snapping the other's arm before he could fire. Voss smirked, unfazed, pressing the gun to Jeremiah's temple. "You're late, Banks," he said, voice smooth as oil, stepping back as Elijah froze, hands up calculating. "Your little war's amusing, but it ends here." Jeremiah coughed, blood flecking his lips, but his gaze locked on Elijah, steady, a soldier's trust. "Tell him," Voss ordered, nodding to Jeremiah, who spat red, voice hoarse. "He's not just Flint Rock's son. It's a network, coast to coast, targeting black leaders, breaking us for profit." Voss chuckled, low and dark. "Smart old man. Too bad it's bigger than you can touch." Elijah lunged, feinting left, drawing Voss's shot wide, bullet pinging off steel. He tackled the mogul, slamming him to the floor, gun skittering free, and pinned him, knee on his chest, fist cocked. "Where's it run?" Elijah growled, twisting Voss's arm, bone creaking. Voss gasped, grinning through pain. "Everywhere. Senators, CEOs, cops. You'll never stop it." Elijah broke the arm, a wet snap, Voss howling, but he didn't. "Kill him." Not yet. He cut Jeremiah loose, hauling him up, the old man swaying but standing, 68 years of fight outweighing the chains. They staggered out, Voss writhing behind, guards dead, the mansion a tomb of silence pierced by rain. Outside, chaos hit. A SWAT team stormed the bluff, misled by fake intel Voss had fed. Terrorist Elijah Banks holding hostages. Choppers. Thumped overhead, spotlights blinding, rifles barking as Elijah shoved Jeremiah behind a stone wall, bullets chewing gravel. He returned fire, 3 rounds dropping 2 shadows, but they were pinned, outgunned, the feds blind to Voss's play. Elijah's mind raced, SEAL training clashing with desperation, until he spotted a drainage pipe 30 yards downhill, a slim shot at escape. They crawled, Elijah shielding Jeremiah, mud soaking them, bullets whining overhead, making it by inches as the team closed in. They surfaced in a ravine, panting, rain washing blood from Jeremiah's face. Elijah's mag down to 1 shot. The rescue was a jagged win, Voss's confession a bombshell, but the SWAT trap flipped it sour, a fifth of Voss's empire bared, yet untouchable. Flint Rock streets stayed locked, curfew choking the protests, the nation's rage muted by Hale's next move. Elijah got Jeremiah to a clinic 10 miles out, a backroom doc Tasha knew, stitching the old man's cuts under. Say, flickering lamp. Jeremiah gripped Elijah's arm, voice fading. "He's right, son, it's bigger than us." Then Hale struck. A shadow in the clinic hall, slipping past the doc with a silenced pistol, firing point blank into Jeremiah's chest. Blood sprayed, Jeremiah slumping, eyes wide, a grunt escaping as he hit the floor. Hale smirked, buzz cut, glinting under the bulb, backing out as Elijah roared, lunging too late, the shot echoing in his skull. The doc screamed, diving for cover, but Elijah was on Jeremiah, hands pressing the wound, blood hot and slick. The old man's breath shallow, fading. "Stay with me, Pops," Elijah pleaded, voice cracking. But Jeremiah's hand squeezed his, weak, a soldier's goodbye. Hale vanished into the night, leaving Elijah cradling his grandfather, the clinic's hum drowning in silence, the war's cost carved deep. Elijah Banks knelt on the clinic floor, blood slick under his hands, pressing Jeremiah's chest where Hale's bullet had torn through, a gaping wound pumping red with every fading beat. The back room stank of antiseptic and fear, the flickering, lamp casting jagged shadows over Jeremiah's slack face, 68 years draining pale. The doc, a wiry guy named Marcus, scrambled for gauze, his hands shaking, but Elijah's voice cut through, raw and ragged. "Stay with me, Pops." Jeremiah's hazel eyes fluttered, locking on his grandson, a weak grip squeezing Elijah's arm, blood bubbling on his lips as he rasped, "You're enough, son." Then he went still, breath gone, the clinic's hum swallowing the silence. Hale's smirk a ghost in the hall. Elijah's chest heaved, a roar trapped in his throat, but he moved fast, seal instincts burying grief. Marcus stitched Jeremiah's wound, pumping meds, swearing under his breath as monitors beeped a faint pulse. Coma, not death, a thread of life clinging stubborn. Elijah stood, blood staining his hoodie, knife sheathed, mind a steel trap. Pulled the burner phone from Voss's mansion, replaying the lieutenant's confession, Voss's voice cold. Senators, CEOs, cops. Everywhere. He sent it to Tasha Brooks, texting, "Leak it, all of it, now." She was holed up in a motel 10 miles out, laptop cracked but alive, and within hours, the file hit every major outlet, CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, Voss's network. Laid bare, a hydra strangling black communities coast to coast. The leak hit like a tsunami, screens flashing Voss's face, Tanner's gruff voice naming names, protests exploding from LA to Harlem, signs screaming, "End the network." Flint Rock's curfew buckled, streets flooding with rage, horns blaring as folks tore down checkpoints, fists raised against riot gear. DC shook, senators scrambling, CEOs resigning, and by noon, FBI jets landed, agents storming Voss's holding cell, cuffing him tight. No bailout this time. His glass tower was raided, files seized, his empire cracking under the nation's glare. Elijah watched from the clinic window, rain streaking glass, Jeremiah's chest rising slow under tubes, a fifth victory snatched from Hale's gun. Flint Rock exhaled, the mob's fire fading to whispers of hope, Tasha's voice crackling over a burner. "They've got him, Elijah, locked tight." The city pulsed alive, curfew lifting, folks hugging in the streets thinking the war was won. Elijah stayed by Jeremiah, hand on his grandfather's still one, letting the news sink in. Voss caged, the network bleeding, a nation awake. Marcus muttered, "He's stable, barely," adjusting a drip, and Elijah nodded, a flicker of relief in his storm-dark eyes, believing for a moment the tide had turned, the beast gutted. Then Hale struck again, a venomous counterpunch from the shadows. At dusk, as Flint Rock cheered, he framed Elijah for a cop killing, planting a bloody knife in the clinic's trash, badge number matching a dead officer found miles away. The lie hit WFLT fast, Hale's voice smug. Elijah Banks, cop killer. Terrorist confirmed. Squads rolled out. A cross-state manhunt igniting, choppers thumping overhead. Michigan to Ohio locked down tight. Elijah's face flashed on screens. Wanted, armed and dangerous. The nation's hope flipping to fear. Protests stuttering as cops swarmed. Voss's network flexing even from a cell. The real blow landed at midnight. Voss's machine unleashed. Hell, a bomb ripping through a black church on Flint Rock's south side. 30 dead in a heartbeat. Pews splintering. Stained glass shattering into the night. Flames roared. Kids buried under rubble. Elders burned alive. A massacre dwarfing. The drone strike. The air thick with screams and smoke. Hale hit the airwaves, grinning through static. Banks's retribution. He's unhinged. The lie stuck. Flint Rock's streets emptying. Curfew snapping back. Terror choking the city's throat. Tasha raced to the clinic, finding Elijah pacing. Jeremiah still comatose, her voice breaking. "They're blaming you, Elijah. 30 gone just like that." Elijah's fists balled, knuckles white. The churches told a knife in his gut. Voss's confession a hollow wind now, drowned in blood and ash. He'd saved Jeremiah, cracked the network, sparked a nation, but Hale's frame and the bombing flipped it all. A fifth victory torched worse than Cedar Lane. Jeremiah lay still, tubes snaking from his chest. Marcus whispering, "He's hanging on, but barely." as sirens wailed closer, manhunt tightening. Elijah grabbed his knife, checking the mag, 1 round left, a seal hunted by his own war. The clinic's walls closed in, Flint Rock a battlefield again, Voss's empire laughing from the shadows, unbowed. Elijah Banks stood in the clinic's dim back room, rain pounding the roof, the faint beep of Jeremiah's monitors cutting through the hum of Flint Rock's manhunt outside. Blood stained his hands, dried from pressing his grandfather's chest, the old man's coma, a fragile thread holding him to life after Hale's bullet. Tasha Brooks paced beside him, her braids tangled, eyes hollow from the church bombing's toll, 30 dead, a wound tearing Flint Rock's black heart. Elijah's face was stone, hazel eyes locked on the burner phone, Voss's confession still echoing in his mind, a national network, senators, CEOs, all feeding on broken communities. The 5th victory had burned away, Hale's frame and the blast flipping hope to ash, but Elijah didn't break. He hunted. He slipped out at dusk, a shadow in the storm, tracking whispers of Voss's inner circle to a private airstrip 10 miles north, a hideout for the network's bosses. The strip was a concrete slash in the woods, floodlights buzzing over a hangar, 6 suits in tailored coats meeting under guard, their voices low, planning the next strike. Elijah infiltrated silent, scaling a pine, knife between his teeth, spotting Voss's lieutenants, a senator with slick hair, a CEO chewing a cigar, Hale among them, buzz cut gleaming, plotting from the shadows. He rigged a recorder, hidden in the hangar's rafters, catching every word. Flint Rock's a test, we break them, the rest fall. The network's scope sprawled, dozens of cities, billions in play, black lives the collateral. Elijah waited, rain dripping through the roof, until Hale stepped out, pacing the tarmac, baton tapping his palm. The seal struck, dropping from the rafters, knife-slashing air, catching Hale mid-stride. A brutal dance ending with Hale's throat torn, blood spraying black under floodlights. Elijah dragged him to the hangar's edge, propping the body, phone, live-streaming the death to Tasha's feed, her motel setup blasting it global. Hale's down. Network exposed. The suits froze, hearing the wet gurgle, then scattered, choppers lifting off as Elijah vanished into the trees, recorder in hand, their panic of victory carved in red. Flint Rock erupted an hour later, Voss's network unleashing. Hell, fires blooming across black blocks, snipers picking off leaders, chaos swallowing the city. Elm Street blazed, homes torched, screams rising with smoke as 30 gunmen hit hard. A massacre dwarfing the church, hundreds dead in minutes. WFLT cut in, reporters choking on ash. Flint Rock burns, terrorist Elijah Banks blamed. The lie stuck, curfew tripled, troops rolling in, but Tasha fought back, uploading the airstrip recording. Senators' voices clear, break them now. Ed hit millions, protests reigniting DC to Chicago. A nation raging as Voss's jet lifted off, escaping custody mid-flight, his empire flexing unbroken. Elijah raced to Flint Rock, boots pounding rubble, finding Tasha in a basement hideout, her laptop glowing amid the dark, survivors huddled, kids with soot-streaked faces, elders clutching blankets, defiance in their eyes. They're killing us all, she said, voice trembling, shoving the recorder's feed live, the network's plan bare. Destabilize, profit, repeat. Elijah armed them, scavenged rifles passed out, a ragtag militia born from ash. They hit the streets, Elijah leading, Tasha at his side, ambushing gunmen in alleys, gunfire cracking, bodies dropping 5, 10, 15, a stand against slaughter. He took a bullet to the shoulder, blood soaking his hoodie but kept moving, knife slashing. A reaper among ruins. They fought to a warehouse on the riverfront, a stronghold vomiting smoke, survivors rallying as Elijah's voice roared, "Hold the line!" Tasha filmed, streaming live, Flint Rock's defiance global, millions watching bodies pile, blood pooling red in the rain. The network's gunmen faltered, outmatched by rage, retreating as choppers thumped overhead, feds late but landing, Voss's jet long gone. Elijah stood atop a crate, shoulder bleeding, knife dripping, Hale's death a spark, but the city a pyre, hundreds dead, streets aflame, a victory drowned in loss. Tasha gripped his arm, eyes fierce. "We showed them, Elijah, they can't hide now." Jeremiah lay comatose miles away, monitors flatlining slow, the war's toll carved in his silence. Elijah's breath rasped, the recorder's truth a blade. Cutting deep, Voss's network exposed but unbowed, its head fleeing while Flintrock bled. The final stand had gutted Hale, cracked the Empire's mask, but the cost was a city in flames, a people broken yet rising. Elijah sheathed his knife. One bullet left, the seal's calm settling cold. A storm paused, not spent. Elijah Banks stood atop the warehouse crate, rain hammering his blood-soaked shoulder. The riverfront a battlefield of flickering flames and twisted metal. Flintrock burned around him, hundreds dead from Voss's network assault, their bodies, strewn across streets, turned to ash, a massacre's echo drowning the city's pulse. Tasha Brooks crouched nearby, her cracked laptop glowing, streaming the airstrip recording live, senators and CEOs plotting black ruin, Hale's death a red stain on the feed. Survivors rallied, rifles scavenged, faces grim with soot and defiance, their stand a beacon piercing the global dark. Jeremiah lay comatose 10 miles away, monitors beeping faint in the clinic, his survival a thread Elijah clung to, the war's cost etched in every shallow breath. The recording hit billions, a torrent breaking dams, protests surging from coast to coast, cities ablaze with rage, New York, Atlanta, Oakland, signs screaming, dismantle the network. DC buckled, senators hauled from offices, CEOs cuffed mid-flight, the FBI scrambling jets to chase Voss's escaped plane, its trail cold over the Atlantic. Flintrock's curfew shattered, troops pulling back, feds flooding in with aid trucks, blankets, medics, a lifeline to a city gutted but rising. Tasha's feed trended eternal, Chas Flintrock lives, millions watching Elijah's silhouette against the fire, a seal turned symbol. Hale's blood a spark that torched an empire's mask. Voss was grounded, jets circling, agents storming his allies, the network crumbling under a nation's fist. Elijah slipped from the warehouse at dawn, rain washing blood from his hands, shoulder throbbing, one bullet left in his mag. He hit the clinic, boots silent on tile, finding Jeremiah still, tubes snaking from his chest, Marcus adjusting drips with a nod. He's waking. Elijah sank beside him, gripping the old man's hand, calluses rough against his own, a soldier's bond unbroken by Hale's lead. Jeremiah's eyes fluttered, hazy but alive, 68 years stirring slow, his voice a rasp. Did we get him, son? Elijah nodded, throat tight, replaying the feed on the burner phone. Voss's empire in chains, Flintrock's scars a testament to their fight. Most of them, Pops, most. The city rebuilt, slow and jagged, federal cash pouring in, schools, homes, clinics rising from ash, overseen by survivors turned leaders, Tasha among them, her fire unquenched. Elijah stayed shadows, hunting Voss's remnants, knife sharp, a ghost ensuring the cleanup held. Jeremiah walked free by week's end, limping but upright, ribs taped, his presence a rally cry at every makeshift podium, voice booming, "We're not done, justice ain't cheap." Flintrock mourned, graves dug, but stood taller, a scarred survivor, its black soul defiant. The network's roots yanked bloody from the earth, then the twist hit, a blade through the dawn. Elijah dug deeper, raiding Voss's seized files, cracking encrypted drives with a seal's precision, unearthing a truth that stopped his breath. A photo slipped free, yellowed, edges curled. Jeremiah, young, Vietnam-strapped, beside a white woman, her smile soft, pregnant in a 60s dress. A birth record followed, 1971. Conrad Voss born to Ellen Voss, no father listed, but the math screamed, Jeremiah's son, birthed in secret, raised by a mother who fled Flintrock's. Blackside, her shame twisting the boy into hate. Voss's war wasn't profit alone, it was personal. A half-black bastard son torching his roots to erase them. Elijah drove to the clinic, tires screeching, photo trembling in his grip, finding Jeremiah in a wheelchair, coffee steaming in his hands, gazing at Flintrock's smoky skyline. "Pops," Elijah said, voice low, sliding the picture over, the old man's eyes widening, then narrowing, a storm breaking in his bruised face. "Ellen?" Jeremiah whispered, fingers tracing her smile, memory flooding back. 1970, a fling cut short by her family's rage, a baby he never knew, lost to whispers and time. "He's mine?" he asked, voice cracking, Elijah nodding slow, the weight sinking deep. Voss, the mogul who'd framed him, burned him, shot him, was his blood warped by hate into a monster. Jeremiah's fists balled, coffee spilling, 68 years crashing into a truth that rewrote the war. "He did this to me, to us, 'cause of me," he said, tears cutting through dust, rage and grief a tangled knot. Elijah knelt, gripping his shoulder, steady as steel. "He chose this, Pops, not you." The revelation hit Flint Rock quiet, a secret kept between them, but it fueled Elijah's fire, the SEAL's calm turning lethal. Voss had built an empire to destroy his own blood, a vendetta masked as greed, every frame, every bomb, every death a son's warped revenge on a father he despised. Elijah vowed to hunt him, knife sharpened, burner buzzing with leads. Voss spotted in Panama, then gone, a ghost in exile, his network wounded but alive. Flint Rock stood defiant, rebuilding brick by brick, Tasha leading, Jeremiah inspiring, a city scarred but unbowed, its black heart beating loud. Elijah slipped into the night, one bullet left, the Reaper's promise a shadow over the world. Voss would pay, blood for blood, a reckoning beyond Flint Rock's borders. Jeremiah watched him go, wheelchair creaking, eyes hard with pride and pain, a father betrayed but unbroken. The war's end a lie, this was just the start. Cops arrest. Black elderly veteran, until he calls his grandson, the most lethal Navy SEAL alive, delivers a raw, unflinching look at resilience against systemic injustice. Jeremiah Banks, a Vietnam vet, embodies the strength of those who endure. Relentless racial oppression, his quiet dignity a shield against brutality. His arrest, framed by a corrupt system, reveals how deeply racism festers, not just in individuals like Hale, but in networks of power, from Voss to senators, profiting off black pain. Elijah, the Navy SEAL grandson, teaches us that fighting back isn't just survival. It's a calculated storm, tearing through lies with precision and heart. Their bond shows family as a fortress, unyielding even when blood betrays, as Voss's shocking lineage proves. The story's escalation, arrests, firebombings, drone strikes, massacres, mirrors the real-world truth. Every step toward justice meets fiercer resistance, demanding unrelenting courage. Flint Rock's rise from ashes highlights community power, ordinary folks turning grief into defiance, a lesson in collective strength against overwhelming odds. Voss's escape and the network's persistence warn us that evil adapts, lurking, beyond each victory, requiring constant vigilance. The twist, Voss as Jeremiah's son, cuts deepest, showing how internalized hate can twist heritage into destruction, a personal tragedy fueling systemic war. We learn that justice isn't a finish line, it's a battle fought daily with scars as proof of progress. Elijah's hunt and Jeremiah's survival urge us to stand, to expose, to resist no matter the cost. What would you risk to protect your own against a world rigged to break you? Drop a comment with your thoughts, hit like if this stirred your soul, subscribe for more tales of grit and share to spread the fight. Thanks for riding this storm with us. May you find strength in your own battles and peace in the victories ahead.